Hi everyone, welcome to BRICS Briefs. After seeing a disappointing debate a few days ago between the two US presidential candidates, Trump and Biden, we wanted to give an analysis and discussion that adds some real value to such an important time in world history. This event as a takeoff point to introduce some important ideas for the audience to consider and give back your thoughts, please. The topics we're going to be covering are leadership in politics, foreign policy, sovereignty and principles, monetary system currencies, in particular the so-called petrodollar. I think it's good to clarify. No, we will not be showing any clips or parts of the debate. So let's run the video. Yep. Look, just want to be absolutely clear. We're trying to, draw. There's a certain level of promotion that we sort of have to do to draw people to what we're presenting at Think BRICS, which is we're trying to add some value and some debate. We want to engage the audience. We do want it to be actually educational. This is a very important time. We're not poking fun at this particular president. And in my opinion, I'll just say it straight up, it's elderly abuse. And I think generally people agree with that. We would love to hear what your thoughts are. And it's certainly the USA is not the only country that's been a victim of this. So let's look at then Soviet. I think we want to cut the sound, unfortunately. So this is Boris Yeltsin. You may remember him if you're old enough.
Gracias.
Я сделал все, что мог.
Just pointing out that, this is not just the USA. And there's been another example, which, the producer who's from Italy, if you remember, Jean-Claude Juncker.
Did I kiss you? Who do you think you are kidding, Mr. Juncker?
Do you have a cigarette?
We're not just poking fun at the US, as sad and as potentially dangerous as it is. If you recall, Jean-Claude Juncker was the head of the EU, the European Union. You bring this in, you may remember there were comments that he was a complete drunk. He's just being playful. Or was he a complete drunk? What do you think? So with those examples in mind, we thought on this topic that Bruce Director would be a great person to give us a meaningful and educational contribution to this. So we welcome him back. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Clive. How you doing this afternoon, I guess, for you, this morning for me?
Yeah, your morning. And yes, thank you for your time this morning, Bruce. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Oh, awesome. For those not familiar with Bruce, he is an author, scientist, musician, philosopher, and a friend. He has been associated with Lyndon LaRouche for nearly half a century. He was an organizer in each of LaRouche's 8 presidential campaigns and served as a paralegal, helping to defend LaRouche and his associates from political persecution. Promethean Action, formerly known as LaRouche PAC, have an intimate and not widely known history with the origins of the now lesser form of what is known as BRICS today. So again, thanks for spending time with us, Bruce. Let's start off. Okay, it was for me. It was disappointing, not unexpected. This event, the debate. But as I say, I want to bring some value to it, and we thought, yes, let's get Bruce. Look, and I spoke with the producer. We noticed from the debate that compared to the 2016 election with Clinton, Trump in then 2016 election was quite fiery. He directly confronted Clinton on the issues and the policies. The debate just gone, Trump seemed to be much softer, or maybe a better word is careful with Biden. This event exposes, I think, the very real danger of having incompetent or incapable leaders. What do you think of this assessment, and what do the viewers think?
Well, I think it's been well known that Biden has been declining mentally. It's been known, it's been very visible for his entire presidency, and it was known to people close to Biden in 2019. And there was a lot of pressure on him not to run. And if you remember, he was losing quite badly in the primaries. He came in, I think, fourth or fifth in Iowa and fifth in New Hampshire. And the elites were actually hoping that Michael Bloomberg would come and save them from Trump. There was unanimity among the part of the globalists in the United States and their European allies, particularly in Britain, that Trump had to go. There was a famous report that came out from the British House of Lords in 2017, I believe, which outlined exactly how the Brits and the globalist elites would sabotage the Trump administration. And it said in that report that they could survive one term of Trump, but they couldn't survive two. And so Trump had to be eliminated. So that was the plan of the elites. They were hoping that Michael Bloomberg, with all his money and his connections to the British and his globalist world outlook, would be their savior. But he failed to take off and get any support. And then in the South Carolina primary, which was the third primary, Biden got an endorsement from a leading politician there, James Clyburn, the number 3 person in the House, and he won the South Carolina primary. And the party unified behind Biden to be their nominee, despite all his flaws. Now, he only won because of fraud. He only won because of the way the country and the Constitution was completely violated under the pretext of COVID. And they portrayed him as sort of the, friendly grandpa who would come in and cool things down and calm things down and be competent and so forth. That was never going to happen because the people who were brought in around Biden to actually run things are completely, I don't know if incompetence is the right word, because they may be competent in carrying out the policy that the globalists want, but the globalist policy is so incompetent that look where it's brought us in 3.5 years, to a world that's on the brink of nuclear war. So, that's really the issue here. It's not Biden's cognitive decline, which is a surprise to anybody, although it's now, the media is now recognizing it because they can't cover it up anymore. And there's a lot of anger in the United States that people have been gaslit by the media and the Democratic Party for all the lies they've told. But nevertheless, the real crisis is, who's running the country in the midst of this, conflicts. And these conflicts never, as Trump says, never would have happened had he been reelected.
Yeah, I remember watching one of the many, obviously, your weekly, daily, then LaRouche pack, and Lyndon LaRouche was saying, he actually laid out what's actually basically occurring now with Iran. And, he was saying that Obama's there. It's Obama. But I actually want to bring up this topic of leadership in politics. And I want to draw on the many decades of experience that you have, and I know a lot of our audience is really not familiar with LaRouche, right? Because he was heavily censored, and as I just explained in Bruce's bio, Lyndon LaRouche ran 8 times for the presidential. He was politically persecuted, right? He was put in jail. So I'm going to share the screen of 2 people, which I was hoping that maybe you could, as examples of leadership. I thought maybe the gentleman on the left, Guyanese Foreign Minister Fred Wills, a friend of Lyndon Helga LaRouche, called for new international development banks at the UN in 1976. And on the right, Indira Gandhi, that's of India actually. Another friend of the LaRouches was killed by the British in 1984. Bruce, I bring these 2 figures up because I did quite a lot of research for this show, because I really wanted to show that and ask you if you could tell us, maybe if you remember, or if you know much under this topic of leadership. I should show. Sorry, this is an EIR publication, and it's titled "The BRICS Summit: A Battlefield Report" by David Christie and Robert Ingram. So this was November 4th, 2016.
Well,
yeah.
Well, the references to Fred Wills and Indira Gandhi really have to be put in the historical context of what was occurring at that time. LaRouche had gained international prominence in 1971 as an economist, because he had been one of the only economists who had forecast that the policies that were initiated in the post-war period, especially in the 1960s, would ultimately lead to a collapse of the Bretton Woods system, which had been set up at the end of World War II. And that led to a global financial debt crisis. I mean, it was nothing in terms of nominal terms compared to what we're talking about now. But nevertheless, there was a global debt crisis, and there was political chaos also throughout the world. And at that time, LaRouche proposed, it was very similar to today in the sense that this economic and political crisis was toppling governments all over the world. In fact, in the period around 1974, 73, 74, virtually every major government in the world was collapsed, and new governments were put in place.
Wow.
And LaRouche proposed at that time that the solution to this crisis would be the establishment of, at the time, what he called an international development bank, to replace or revive, rejuvenate what had been intended by Roosevelt for the Bretton Woods system, which would have created an economic policy that would be based on long-term investment, a debt moratorium, especially for developing countries, and long-term investments in infrastructure and economic development programs throughout the world, which would in turn fuel economic development in the advanced countries. And 2 of the strong proponents of that were Fred Wills and Indira Gandhi. Wills, I guess that picture comes from an address that he gave at the United Nations General Assembly, in which he stood up before, I think he was president of the General Assembly at that time, and he called for it says now's the time for a debt moratorium. And later he became a very prominent and public collaborator of LaRouche. He was also targeted by the British for assassination and had to seek refuge in the United States. So, and of course, you reported on the situation with Indira Gandhi. That's the context of that's the historical context. And I think the situation we face today is similar but different. It's similar in the sense that we're dealing with a global financial crisis. We're dealing with the consequences of decades and decades of money printing policies. LaRouche's policy for a reorganization of the world financial system in the 1970s did not occur. What happened was that you had basically without going into the details, a worldwide bailout of the debt. And the bailout basically came by stealing from every country and every person on earth and putting that money into bailing out Wall Street and London banks. Part of this was done by you mentioned the petrodollar, by the rigged oil embargo, oil crisis hoax, which raised the price of oil by 400%. And that functioned virtually as a worldwide tax, which then ultimately found its way into the banks and bailed out the debt situation. But that debt situation erupted again later in the 1970s and in the 1980s, and several times. And since that time, we've had nothing but debt crisis, bailout, debt crisis, bailout, debt crisis, bailout. And each time the debt crisis has gotten worse and the bailouts have gotten bigger. And the latest round has been, the 2008, 2009 crisis and, the COVID situation. And we're paying the price now with worldwide inflation and with financial instability all over the world. And the problem is that, or the dynamic here is that this decades-long policy, which has the effect of ruining people's lives and reducing the population of the conditions of life throughout the world, has now led to a revolt, especially in the United States and Europe. You see the elections in France, the elections coming up in Britain, and you have the elections in the United States, and people are revolting against this globalist policy, and that is that's really what's driving all these political developments. The difference is that I think in the United States, you mentioned the question of leadership. I think the important point is that in the United States, we're actually in a position to assert proper leadership with the support that President Trump is getting for coming back into office. But I would point out to your viewers who may not be aware of this, that the United States seems to have a miraculous history in the sense that we've been through many crises, and unlike other countries, we have been able to call forth the quality leadership. I'm referring particularly to Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt. In a period where every other country would have been destroyed, the United States pulled itself together under the proper leadership and basically saved itself and created a potential for the world to get out of the crisis. And I think that's what's happening right now.
I hope so. I do. As much, and I know a lot of we do encourage the audience to express their view, and a lot of them are, I won't say anti-American, but they're not happy with what's happening in America. And so the next topic I want to bring up is on foreign policy. Now, I do want to go back into where you mentioned, Bruce, about the petrodollar, because that's an important part of it. But I want to bring this up, and I'm going to read this, and I know that it's very tedious when someone reads stuff, but also people are listening. Sometimes people they listen to us as a radio show; they're not watching. So I'm going to read this, and it's very important. I'm reading it for a reason, so bear with me, okay? Um, this is from the issue of EIR, and it's titled in this section. It's America's Role in the World, and it's titled FDR, the Forgotten Man. The history of LaRouche's call for a four-power agreement to create a new Bretton Woods by William Wirtz. William Wirtz was jailed with Lyndon LaRouche. So let me read this, and please just stick with me, okay? It's under the heading of Don't Play the British Game. If you don't bring the United States into this combination, if this is not initiated by the United States, then you have precisely the condition which Franklin Roosevelt told his son must be avoided, which is Britain and us versus Russia. That is the British game plan. You've got to prevent that. And there are many people throughout the world who fall into that trap, including people in Russia out of desperation. Sanctions are being imposed upon Russia. The same kinds of policies which, unjustified, are being imposed on other countries. That is the British policy. And you have to identify it as the British policy. And you can't give up on the United States. You have to go from the standpoint of a higher strategic flank, grand strategy, which is that you've got to win over the United States. And if that doesn't occur, then the world is divided. And that's what will lead to war, as we see in the machinations of the British in respect to Syria and other locations, Ukraine and so forth, throughout the world. Just a reminder, this is September 7th, 2018. Continuing, this is what I want to convey. The need for that four-power alliance, as Lyndon LaRouche has emphasized, which must include the United States, which means we have to change the United States. And we need allies abroad who are committed to changing the United States back to its original constitutional intent. Lyndon LaRouche has been committed to this, certainly upon the very news of the death of Roosevelt in April 1945, and he is a citizen who has fought for this policy. And that's what each of us has to do as citizens, who have to become informed about the actual history of the United States. One portion of which is which I've tried to give you today, and commit your life to that fight. That's what Roosevelt did. That's what Lyndon LaRouche has done. I get your comment on that, Bruce.
Well, I think Will gave a good summary there. That I would hope that people both in the United States and abroad would really take would really consider quite deeply. I mean, I can understand that people outside the United States would have difficulty understanding the situation. And this is compounded mostly by the fact that the British run a propaganda campaign against the United States, for which most people in Europe and Asia and Africa oftentimes fall victim to. Now, in the past, the United States sort of was able to counter that by our behavior, but basically over the regimes of Bush, Obama, and even Clinton to some extent, and Biden, I think that's become more difficult because the United States has been run by people who are not really looking out for the interests of the U.S. They've been looking out for the interests of the globalist policies. Now that's come to an end. That's why people are revolting, and I think that's really what's going on here. I mean, LaRouche always emphasized that the biggest conflict over the last 400 or 500 years has been a conflict in a certain sense of an ideological one, but a cultural one between the British Empire and the imperial system, which to this day still dominates Europe to a large extent, and the concept of the United States as a constitutional republic governed by the people with the under the concept of man that's outlined in the Declaration of Independence, that man is created with unalienable rights, and these rights are given by God, and man is a co-creator with God, participates in the ongoing creation of God, and man is different than any other animal, and that we have to organize our society and our government according to foster those characteristics of man, the creative powers and human development. No other country on earth has had that in their culture, constitution, and organization of society. It occurred in the United States not because the people here, is something particular to the territory of the North American continent, but because the United States was a project of European Renaissance and people realizing that there had to be a change in the direction of society away from the remnants of the imperial system. And they couldn't do it in Europe. So they launched a centuries long project to settle the North American continent, and which ultimately led to bringing about the establishment of the United States as a nation. And once it was established, the empire has been trying to destroy it. And so throughout our history, you've had this conflict. And this really determines, the policies abroad. For example, Russia has played a very prominent role in defending and supporting the United States even before it was created. It was the League of Armed Neutrality organized by Catherine the Great, which enabled helped the United States greatly in winning the Revolutionary War. It was the policies of Alexander II in the Civil War to defend the United States from the Confederacy. And of course, it was the alliance between the United States and Russia during World War II, which helped defeat fascism. And we could go on and on. So there's throughout history, there's been recognition of patriots throughout the world to cooperate with the United States in defeating the British Empire. At this point, that cooperation needs to be brought into existence, first by getting the United States under the proper leadership that, as Trump says, will make America great again, and then collaborating especially with the three other major powers in the world, Russia, China, and India, which are large countries, all have different cultures. And it's not to say there aren't conflicts between these countries, but they are different, but they have a common interest in working together to defeat the British Empire and to establish the kind of policies which brought about the creation of the United States. And I think that's the only direction that we can go that will actually provide some hope for peace and stability and progress for mankind. I don't see any other combination that would work. And so I would urge people outside the United States to actually learn about this history and recognize that that's really what's going on. You make a grave mistake to think that the United States is an imperial power. It is not. There have been people in the United States who wanted to reincorporate the United States into the British Empire and make it an imperial power. And sometimes they've gotten great influence over U.S. policy, which has resulted in disasters for the country. But it's not the American idea. It's not the American way. And the American people right now are trying to assert that. And that's what I think is the most important thing that's going on.
Yeah, and that's what I hope. When I egg on Bruce, and he's come on a couple of times now, and you've seen my reaction. I just want to be clear that that's what I want to see. It's not that I'm in love with America, and I'm not trying to justify myself, but I'm trying to just be clear on why I have this attitude, because I've done my research. Not many people are really aware of who I am, and I'm not going to go into it. But just to be clear, what Bruce was just describing, that's what I'm talking about. The American system, right? That's what I advocate for. That's why I say I hope that the USA gets who they want. If they want Trump, they can have Trump. Just as like in Brazil, if they want their president, they can have their president. That's their choice. That's sovereignty. And that's the next topic I want to bring up is sovereignty and principles. Now, again, and I do apologize, but I'm going to be reading a little bit. So please just bear with me. The people who are just listening are going to appreciate that. But those who are viewing, it can be a little bit tedious, and I apologize, but it'd be well worth it. So on the topic of sovereignty and principles, I want to bring up this. Now, this is from an EIR edition. It's titled The BRICS and Hamilton, What Americans Need to Know. So this is from December 19, 2014. So I'm going pretty early here. Under the heading, The Hamiltonian Principle. Moderator Dennis Speed reminded the audience that on December 13, 1790, 224 years ago today, Hamilton submitted to the Congress of the United States his report on the National Bank. This is the second of 4 Hamilton writings, which are, as a body, the most important documents in the science of physical economy. They are the most important documents after Gottfried Leibniz's 1672 essay, Society and Economy, which established the science, and Benjamin Franklin's 1729 essay, A Modest Inquiry into the Nature and Necessity of Paper Currency. Speed continued. Hamilton establishes in these reports that it is the power of the people of the United States through one sovereign central government to create the means for the promotion of the general welfare of all its citizens through unifying the nation by internal improvements, canals and water management, and rail systems, including continental rail systems slightly later. This would be done through a system of credit solely issued and controlled by that national government and dispersed through the authority of Congress. To that end, there must be a national bank. It is this system of national credit and the internal improvements resultant from it that was the basis for the United States becoming, at one time, the greatest economy in the world. Hamilton's report on the national bank systemically tears down the premises of monetarism, in which money is seen as a value in itself, and defines a form of national banking where the banks become nurseries of national wealth, as measured in the increase of commerce, industry, and living standards. That is exactly what the BRICS are doing today. Now, keep that in mind. I'm going to read a little bit further. Again, I'm sorry, a little bit tedious, but this is important. Under the heading, Challenging Geopolitics. And there's a gentleman here, Clyde Margarelli. So I'm going to read from here. Clyde Margarelli, author and former director of war studies and current professor of sociology at William Patterson University in Wayne, New Jersey, spoke on, quote, positive approaches to a Russia-China-India alliance, the true West Point intelligence tradition. He began, one of the often neglected positions in relationship to economics and war is how the military feels, particularly the professional soldier, and in particular, the higher professional soldiers in America, which come from West Point. It's a tradition that goes back to 1812, where the moral element is stressed, where weapons change, tactics may change, but the position of moral development becomes key. It's the will to win and also the will to win dependent upon the righteousness of the effort itself. Those who have been to West Point know that the tradition or the stress for the cadet is a traditional conception of honor, duty, country. From that, they develop the capacity to make the decisions as to what is right and wrong. And within the legal framework, they have the duty to disobey illegal wars, not a right, but a duty to disobey these. There are three basic concepts of war. The one we now face today is the British concept. It's not a new concept. It dates back to the Athenians, the Spartans, the Carthaginians, the Venetians, into World War One, into World War Two. It's a concept that is based upon war as strictly an application of power without any moral aspect to it. Margarelli made it clear that this imperial theory of warfare was the most expensive in the loss of property and human life, and ultimately fails in every case, in almost every case. Now, I, I read that, and on this topic of sovereignty and principles, I thought this was very important to point out, because people viewing the United States as this military power, and it's being exerted, and people are being killed. Countries are being regime changed. Um, but I think that excerpt, and I want to get your comment on that too, and if you comment on what the viewers are bringing up, because I hope this is provoking people, which is my intention too. And I know you love to provoke people, Bruce, one of your many talents. But I wanted to get your comment on those couple of excerpts.
Well, would you say that those were from 2013? Things have changed quite dramatically since then. Um,
Yes.
I don't know if I would agree with the characterization that the BRICS are doing what is stated there. I think things
Mm.
are much more chaotic now than they ever were, and that I think without real strong American leadership in this direction, it's going to be, I commend any country on earth to trying to defend their own sovereignty and defend their ability to develop their national economy on the basis of investments in science and technology and um, education and development of their population. But I think one has to realize right now that we are we are living in a period where the the uh, the parasitical financial system is so out of control that you're not going to be able to find any stability anywhere unless this is reorganized. And I don't see how that can be done without American leadership, not America alone, but American leadership in collaboration, especially with the three other countries of the four powers, Russia, China, and India. Um, I think that's the direction Trump was going. If you remember, the very first thing he did when he became president, he had Xi Jinping come to Mar-a-Lago. They developed a relationship. He was working to develop a relationship with Putin and Russia. That was, of course, sabotaged uh, by the British. And he later developed a very strong relationship with Prime Minister Modi once Modi became Prime Minister of India. And so I think Trump has that intention. I think he's going to try and pull it together when he becomes president again. Obviously, things have changed quite dramatically. Relations between the United States and China and Russia have deteriorated, especially because of Biden's policy of promoting the Ukraine war. But I think that Trump can repair that, and that's his intention. It's going to be more difficult for him than it was what he started to do. But also, this is the people who sabotage that are significantly weaker now because of the exposure of what they did and the exposure of the failure of that policy. we've never been closer to nuclear war than we are right now. And even during the days of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, U.S. relations with Russia or the Soviet Union at that time were not as tense as and deteriorated as they are right now. We had contacts with the Soviet Union. There were discussions. Right now, Biden has cut off all contacts with the Russians, which is really just crazy. And there's no, as Trump says, there's no reason why this war should have ever occurred. Biden had this delusion, or the people around Biden, but I think he shared the delusion that the war would be a way to break Russia, and that he publicly stated Russia will be in shambles within two months. And here we are, 3 years later, and the Russian economy is doing better than the U.S. economy in many respects.
It's booming.
And millions, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. Tremendous damage has been done to the economies of the United States, Europe, obviously Ukraine. And that's not to say that Russia doesn't have problems. I'm sure it certainly does. But this policy of it never works. And it's not the first time it's been tried. You can go back to Vietnam. You can go back to the Iraq policy, the policy, the decisions to overthrow Gaddafi, the Syria policy. These fantasies that these people have, or Afghanistan, the fantasies that these people have of remaking the world in some image, a Wilsonian image, in the image of the British Empire, has always brought about nothing but pain, destruction, and chaos, and always has weakened the United States. And that's what Trump has pledged to stop.
Yeah. I did want to clarify there, because a lot of people are not aware of the American system of political economy, right? So national banking, which I referenced there as we sort of lead into the topic, because economics and people and a country and the citizenry actually in control of their own financial system is a point of sovereignty. So I just want to point that out. And there's a particular system which was developed by Alexander Hamilton, and obviously the principles around the founding of the Constitutional Republic of USA that allow that. And I want to clarify here, when Bruce and I advocate that USA is essential to BRICS, and what is, as I say, a lesser form now of what was the original intention, which was USA, Russia, India, and China. That was the intention original with the IDB, the International Development Bank. I'm not being entirely clear here. I'm a little bit dispersed, but I'm making an attempt. USA has the actual constitution, and it has a form of government that makes it possible to enact a credit system and cooperate. But that requires that the citizenry actually participates. Now, if the citizenry does not participate, then it does not work. And that doesn't really matter what form of government you actually have. But particularly in the USA, it makes it actually possible. And then with that system, it can cooperate with other countries. And I think, as we've seen, and Bruce, you point out that it is chaotic with the BRICS, and it's been good movement. We've been reporting on that, and it's going well, but it may not actually be successful, and it may lead to more conflict and more war, which we will see. And I'm not saying it's going to, but I'm just saying that it actually may lead to blocks of countries actually, and then they start to actually fight with each other, right? And then we actually have a worse situation. So, hey, what do you think, right? This is to your audience. What do you think, right? We want to know and participate. So I don't know if that clarified a little bit, but let's move on to the next topic, which is, sort of getting into...
Just let me just
Go
say
ahead.
that I think the key thing in that regard of your concern is people have to realize who the enemy is here. That problem is that we structurally you have a global British Empire. When I say British Empire, I'm not referring to the British government. It's just the Anglo-Dutch financial empire, which incorporates not just things in Britain, but also in the United States, even in China, and also in Russia and other countries throughout Europe and so forth. Financial institutions that have an imperial system, cheap labor, control of raw materials, setting people against each other based on um, creating wars and conflicts like the British did. The Roman Empire idea of divide and conquer is very much, well known, and it's been documented throughout history of what the policies of the empire is. The mistake people make is they think this doesn't exist anymore. It does, and it's governing the policies of these countries. When you hear people talk about a rules-based order, that's who's making those rules. These are, the rules are not made by sovereign.
Oh, we might have lost.
There we go. Am I back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're back. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead again.
The rules are made by these international organizations, which are whose loyalty and interest is not to human beings, but to a system in which they control, and that's that's the enemy, and that's what people have to uh, uh, recognize. When I look around the world and I see even the BRICS countries, I see accommodation to the for whatever reason. Sometimes for in a false belief that this is in their national interests, but an accommodation um, to the system that is actually going to destroy them. For example, every country except for Trump, except for the United States under Trump, has joined the Paris Climate Accords and advocates the policies of the Paris climate change. Okay, you take China, which has profited quite well economically from uh, manufacture and development of solar panels and electric vehicles and so on and so forth. So in China's national interest, it's in their national interest to promote the widespread adoption under the guise of climate change of these kinds of technologies. Of course, domestically, China, for its own reasons, has to exploit correctly coal and nuclear and every other form of energy. So, but now you have this regime that it seems to have, and Russia has agreed to this too, has imposed this climate um, dictatorship on the world, which is really in the long run going to devastate the economy, and it has led, I think, directly to a demographic crisis, which is going to affect every nation on earth. So one has to realize that these kinds of policies, which do not originate in any one nation, but are created by these international organizations, these imperial structures, are the things that are the enemy and have to be dismantled. And that's where I say that you've got to have leadership from the United States. Under Trump, first thing he did was pull out of the Paris Climate Accords. And the first thing Biden did when he came in was to rejoin them. And people focus on, well, what was the impact in the United States? It was bad. But what was the impact worldwide of uh, of removing the only real resistance to a global policy, which was antithetical to human development.
Yeah,
I think the problem is
it,
that people don't realize who their enemy is. They think their enemy is the United States. Their enemy is not the United States. Their enemy is the enemy of the United States.
yeah. This is that very, and this is why, I'm not just bringing you on about Trump and Biden and USA, but for that you try to describe this for our audience so they can understand. Because I know for sure that the audience, it may not be completely clear to our audience. It wasn't completely clear to me. And I've explained this to many people, my friends, my mother, other people that are not aware, right? I've tried to talk to them about that. They're not aware of it. So this is really, we're
But
really making an effort.
there's a global
Yeah.
propaganda campaign that the British imperial forces have been very adept at doing. And it has its tentacles everywhere. But look at how many people believe in this hoax about climate change, and that we have to adopt these crazy economic policies and reduce the population. For decades we've heard that there's a population bomb, that we have to reduce the population. And now here we are, having implemented those policies for the last 50 years with a demographic crisis, which is hitting every country on earth, advanced countries, uh, developing countries, Asian countries, European countries. And so you have this um, demographic crisis, and I don't think there's anything more threatening to the survival of mankind than not reproducing human beings.
Yeah, it certainly is an issue. But I wanted to bring up too, and because I want to be as fair as possible, even in the context of the fact that we do have this genocide policy that's based on climate, right? Because if you remember, Bruce, a little while, and I don't want to go on this too much because I do want to move to the next topic, but if you remember, the Philippines president a few years ago, Duterte, he actually threatened Canada and said, "Stop dumping your rubbish on Philippines, otherwise we're going to go to war." I don't know if you remember that, but it was fairly significant at the time. And then what sort of came out of that was the alternative media, which was quite dramatically growing at that time, right? This is when Trump came in the first time. Investigated this, and exposed it. And what we found out was that Western countries had been exporting their rubbish to developing countries, and they were being paid to do that. And then it was being burnt or dumped in those countries.
Right.
So it was so to developing countries, this is the environmental impact and the care of the environment is absolutely a very important thing, and we are not saying that is not important, right? Even I was having a conversation with our producer who lives in Italy, and he was talking about the river in his area where he grew up is destroyed completely. It's gross. You can't swim in it. You can't walk in it. It's disgusting, right? This stuff needs to be handled, but there's reasons why that happens. And so again, I just sort of want to
Well,
be clear with
we have the technology to clean all those things up, but it's an anti-human policy. It's like Obama going to Africa and saying that if everybody in Africa had air conditioning like we do in the United States, you would end up burning up the planet. So, what kind of imperial policy is that? And it's a complete lie. You can build nuclear power plants all over Africa. Cheap, we can build them and provide abundant electricity. It's ironic that all the people who shut down nuclear power and advocated for reducing coal power are now, demanding increases in production of electricity to power data centers so that they can use AI to control finances and the population. So it's totally hypocritical, and I think people know that, but let's eliminate it. And you're not going to eliminate it unless you're willing to break with these institutions. And,
Yeah.
since the United States under false leadership participated in creating these institutions, under the right leadership, it can lead the fight in um, uh, dismantling these institutions.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Let's look. The last topic I want to bring up was to do with the financial stuff, the currency.
Okay.
But I did want to ask this, and I just get your take on it. Would it be difficult to remove Biden from the race? I mean, this is sort of going away. Or in another way, would the Democratic Party donors want their money back if Biden was withdrawn from the presidential race?
Well, there's a lot of it's actually kind of fun to watch and probably very difficult for people to understand. It's very much like a Shakespearean tragedy because a
Mm,
lot of people have their their positions and what as to what they want to happen, and they're fighting for them. But that doesn't mean that they'll get them or it'll work out in the way they want. I would say, first of all, technically, is it possible to remove Biden from the race? Yes, obviously, you could replace him.
yeah.
He could resign the presidency and let Kamala Harris become the vice president, and then have an
Oh,
open
God.
convention to see if she were to get the if she were to get the nomination, other people would compete with her. The actual nominee of the party is not officially chosen and won't be officially chosen until their convention in late August, the Democratic
Oh,
convention in late August. Um, and even after the convention, a candidate can withdraw for health or whatever reasons, and a new candidate can be appointed. Of course, when you do something like that, it's going to be very difficult for whoever steps in to actually run a campaign. Um, the Biden has a nationwide campaign apparatus, which doesn't transfer to someone else, and money doesn't transfer. And frankly, most of the Democrats who are being floated as possible replacements for Biden um, are don't poll worse than he does against Trump.
mm,
So that's it can happen. On the other hand, if Biden continues to be the nominee, just from a political standpoint, let alone the danger to the world and the country of him continuing to remain president, uh, the he's going to lose, or likely to lose, I should say.
looks
And
that way.
yeah, and the victory Trump had yesterday in the Supreme Court of the United States, and the effective fight that Trump has waged against the lawfare, the use of the legal system for political purposes, that has never really happened on this level, but Biden has implemented it. Um, all that stuff has really soured the population on the Democratic Party. But there
Mm,
are people out there who say that Obama very much wants Biden out, and he wants to put someone in, either his wife or somebody else, to be the party. There are many people, prominent people in the party, um, who have been calling for Biden to step aside. So there's enormous pressure on him. Um, on the one hand, voluntarily he has to, I mean, he's the one who has to decide, and his family, especially his wife and his son Hunter, are supposedly urging him to stay in. He could stubbornly stay in, but that doesn't mean he'll be able to. He could be
mm,
pressured to drop out. But all the people who are right now, I think what's happening behind the scenes is people are trying to make a lot of plans and maneuvers to try and see how they could engineer a change in candidate. And whether or not they succeed in doing that, we'll have to see. It can happen, and whether it will happen or not, I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows, including the people who think they're maneuvering this thing.
Yeah.
I can only tell people outside the United States that, and even in the United States, that whatever you think is going to happen, probably something else will happen as well. It won't exactly
Probably.
turn out the way you want.
Yeah. Well, actually, we're going over, but I'm going to keep going because I'm just going to keep going until the director actually turns the screen off, right?
All
But
right. Sorry.
no, it's fine. Like, because I think this is important discussion, right? This is happening. This is dangerous when we have leadership like this. So, but I want to bring up and just ask you before I go into the financial stuff, Kennedy. You know, in the context of what you were just sort of saying, Kennedy. What you reckon? Would Trump debate Kennedy, or what
Well,
do you
not
think?
unless he gets more support. I mean, this is another mistake that the Democrats made. Biden rigged the primary process. He
Mm,
kept Kennedy out, and you didn't allow any other Democrats to challenge him. And in the past, you've had vigorous, like Trump went through a vigorous primary process. And, uh, I mean, he beat all his opponents handily, but you have to have an open process. And uh, Biden successfully kept Kennedy out of the Democratic Party. Kennedy went for an independent run, which is very difficult to do in the U.S.
yeah,
And I mean, it's much more complicated than people realize and requires huge amounts of money. He's picked a vice presidential candidate who's a billionaire heiress, and hopefully that will give him the resources. But so far, his campaign hasn't taken off, and he's not even on the ballot in enough states to get to win the presidency. So unless his campaign were to take off, which I don't think it will, um, I don't see any reason why Trump would debate him. Although I think Trump has said that he'd be happy to debate him if his campaign, if he became a real viable candidate. So far, he's not.
right, right. Oh, no, that's good to know. That's and our audience is actually after your last appearance with us. There were a few sort of comments and questions, and that was one of them. I try to bring up in the hour. I've gone a bit over, but
Right.
I'm going to share this, and again we've gone over, but I want to share this, and I'm going to read a little bit. It won't be too long, but we're moving on to the topic of the monetary currencies, and particularly the petrodollar. I mean, this gets a lot of attention when we're talking on the BRICS theme and the topic. So let me just read this, and then um, I'll get your comment, Bruce.
Okay.
So this is from a paper from EIR, 1992, and it's titled "Governments Back the International Drug Trade and Narco Dollar Market." Now, it's a fairly short paper, but under the heading of debt financing, it reads, "The petrodollar economy, which emerged from the combination of deindustrialization, opposition to nuclear energy done on behalf of the oil policy, and the trade imbalances arising from the oil price hoax of 1973 to 74, created temporarily what was called a petrodollar market. That is, especially third world countries which required imported oil because they were denied the right to have nuclear technology or to develop their own petroleum resources, had to pay prohibitive prices suddenly for their basic minimal energy needs. They had to finance this with debt. A great portion of the debt came through the refinancing of surplus earnings by members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, and others involved. These earnings were placed on deposit, not actual deposit, but in trust, in custody of Swiss and other banks by, for example, the Gulf oil exporting states. These amounts of money placed in custody of Swiss and other banks, although not at the liability of the bank for the money as such, were then loaned by institutions such as New York City banks, which would loan these monies on behalf of, say, the Saudis or a Gulf state to a third world country which required the loans in order to continue to buy oil. This process led to the emergence of what was called the petrodollar market and the growth of off-balance sheet liabilities by the banks in the eurodollar market, and it was interfaced, of course, with the growth of the low reserve or reserve-free system within the British Commonwealth banking system, as typified by, for example, the Cayman Islands banks, or later the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI. I bring this up, this particular excerpt, because I wanted to clarify for people the petrodollar, because there's so much stuff about that. But, in relation to, surely, Bruce, you would have heard there's constant talk about this, right? The de-dollarization, right?
Yes.
The BRICS and the currencies, and they're using their national currency, which is a great thing. But in the context of this petrodollar thing now, Saudi Arabia said they're not going to sell their oil, and that's sort of fake news. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think there's a lot of understandable reasons why people will want de-dollarization, especially because of the abuse of the dollar as a reserve currency under Biden and Bush and Obama, especially under Biden, where you've used the reserve status of the dollar to implement sanctions, like which has been done in Russia, or even now where they've claiming the right to confiscate Russian reserves that are held in dollars in Europe by European banks primarily to finance the war. And so, and also the other use of sanctions, which I think, is understandable. I'm against those policies, and the United States never should have done them, and they've completely backfired. However, I think ultimately that there's, because of that, countries are having to look for ways to do business with each other using national currencies, which works okay in a limited way, but already that's created strains because of the physical economic imbalances between these nations. So I don't really see a way that you can replace the dollar with anything else at the current time. So the real hope is that the United States gets its act together with a new Trump administration, and that we then can restore the dollar to a stable, valuable currency, which other countries can rely on as a reserve currency. And the basis for that is not, gold reserves or anything like that, but the physical economic characteristics of the U.S. economy, which I think, are quite positive if we adopt the kinds of policies that LaRouche advocated, and we see Trump adopting, large-scale investments in energy production, infrastructure, research and development for advanced technologies, development of space, development of fusion, development of new types of in biopharmaceutical area, agriculture, these kinds of things, which will restore the U.S. economy. That will give strength to the dollar. It will provide a stable dollar that other countries can depend on, and with confidence that the U.S. government is not going to abuse the role of the dollar for political purposes that are antithetical to the interests of the United States. I think the dollar will still remain the reserve currency. If it doesn't, if the United States doesn't do that, and the dollar continues to become less reliable, I think that whatever replaces it will not be very stable. And that's a real problem.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay. We're going too long. I really appreciate your time, Bruce, coming to in the morning. And
my pleasure. I
Yeah.
hope to do it again. I really think it's important to reach this audience, and I would like to hear the feedback from people and be happy to engage in any discussions uh, anybody might want to have on the basis of what I've said.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. All right, let's end it off before the director turns it off. The other
Please,
director.
please forward me any responses you get, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay. All right, we'll do that. Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate your time on that.
Okay.
All right, let me end off. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
So thanks for tuning in to BRICS Brief. We hope you've enjoyed this dive into the multipolar world and wish to join the conversation. So as Bruce said, please comment if you'd like to ask him something or anything, or you have a question. Please like and share this episode and spread it as far as possible. You can follow us on our Substack and other social media platforms, especially our Telegram channel. It's all linked below. We really would like people to be a part of our Telegram channel. It's one of the channels that one of the media platforms that has a fair amount of protection. And if you've noticed, not to go on too long, but if you've noticed, when other channels get censored, it's probably the last one that gets attacked, and there's reasons for that. So we have all our news on there. Please join up. If you're in the USA or are outside and wish to make a connection with Promethean Action, you can visit the website. It's prometheanaction.com. Stay curious, stay connected, stay optimistic. Let's keep exploring together. Ciao.